Hi guys, so today we are going to be looking at Neil Armstrong, who is the first man to ever set foot on the moon. But I wanted to start the video with this footage of the actual moon landing. So here you go.
At 15 seconds, guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. We have a liftoff. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. 30 seconds. Forward drift. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Tranquility base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're pretty busy for a minute.
Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon. On this July 20th, 1969.
That's one small step for man. One giant leap for mankind. Oh, that looks beautiful, Neil. It has a stark beauty all its own. It's like much of the high desert of United States. It's different, but it's very pretty out here. Beautiful, beautiful. Isn't that something? Magnificent sight out here. Magnificent desolation. Tranquility Base, Houston. Guidance recommendation is pinged, and you're cleared for takeoff. Roger, understand. We're number 1 on the runway. 7, 6, 5, engine arm active. Beautiful. Very smooth. Very quiet ride. Apollo 11, this is Hornet, over. This is Apollo 11, reading you loud and clear. Our position 1330.
Well, I hope you enjoyed watching that video, and that short clip is about Neil Armstrong, like I said, and he is the first man to ever set foot on the moon. But that isn't Neil Armstrong's whole life. That's just part of his life. That wasn't the end of his career or even the start of his career. Neil Armstrong was a pilot in the war, and so we have to go all the way back to the start of his life, which began in 1930. He was born in August in 1930 in a place in America called Ohio. That's where his parents were from. His father worked for the government in Ohio, and he moved around a lot. When he was 17, he enrolled in a college, which is like our universities, where his college was paid for by the Navy. So that meant that after he'd finished college, he had to go and work for the Navy. So now Neil Armstrong, one of the things that Neil Armstrong loved to do more than anything in the world ever was to fly. And before he could even learn to drive or even get a license to even begin to learn to drive, he could already fly planes. And actually, one of the things that he is most known for, other than being the first man to be on the moon, is that at the age of 16, he could already legally fly planes. And that's before he could even drive a car. He loved to fly anything. If it could fly, he knew how to fly it. So, in 1947, at the age of 17, Neil Armstrong enrolled in college to study aeronautical engineering. That's the engineering of flight. And that was paid for by the Navy, which meant that he had to go and serve in the Navy after he graduated, which he did. And he went to serve in the US Navy. Because he was serving in the Navy, that meant that he was involved in some wars after he finished university. And he became quite high up in the Navy. So he started off as a pilot, and then he kept being promoted, and he flew a lot of missions for the Navy, receiving a lot of medals for that. throughout his life in the Navy, he was a naval officer, a test pilot, an aviator for the Navy. But then once he came out of the Navy, he was a rocket scientist. Obviously, he was an astronaut, and then later on, he became a university professor. Now, this is the funny thing about him being an astronaut. He very nearly didn't get to be an astronaut. When he applied to be when they were asking for applications for the first ever round of astronauts, that was called the Gemini 8 project. Not the Apollo 11, which we all know him for. He wasn't going to apply. He'd heard about it, but he wasn't really that fussed. So the first round he wasn't going to do. But he thought, when they put out the applications again, he thought, maybe I will, maybe I won't. But he did. And he put his application in. And as luck would have it, one of his friends saw his application form, saw his name on it and thought, oh, I know him. I quite like him and I think he might be jolly good. So actually took his application form from thousands out of the pile and put it on the top. And that is how Neil Armstrong's application form came to be on the top of the pile. Which is quite handy, isn't it? So, out of all those thousands, Neil Armstrong's application wasn't in the first round, it was in the second round of applications for the Gemini 8 project. Now, this project was launched in 1966, and it was a spaceflight program of NASA, and they were to go round orbit, and they had to go round the Earth. They had to orbit the Earth, but there was something wrong in the space system of the craft, and they couldn't land. So they had to immediately stop the mission and come back to Earth. Then comes Apollo 11, which is the mission to land on the moon. So Neil Armstrong was the commander of the mission of Apollo 11. Buzz Aldrin was the lunar module pilot, and Michael Collins was the command module pilot. And they landed their spacecraft named Apollo Lunar Module Eagle on the moon's surface. They stayed on the moon for 21 hours. So nearly a whole day, not any longer than that. And as command leader of the mission, that's what gave Neil Armstrong the right to be the first person out of the the command module, not Buzz Aldrin as the pilot, because he wasn't the leader of the mission. So let's find out some more information of the spacecraft. When they were about to take off, now I don't know whether you know this, but when they were about to take off, the firing pin, the little pin that would launch the sequence code, so you know right at the start of the video where they do the launch code and they have to count down, there's a button that they have to press in the capsule to start the sequence as well. So it's all done from center command, where you see them in their little building, but obviously they have to do something to inside the spacecraft as well. It's all connected. That didn't work. The button was faulty. So they used a pen. Buzz Aldrin had a pen, and so that the launch wasn't a failure, they shoved a pen into the slot where the switch was broken, and used the pen as the switch so that the launch wasn't a failure. How clever is that for problem solving? Otherwise it would have been a failure. Now the quote as well. Now I found this quote, I didn't know this. So Neil Armstrong's first step on the moon took place on the 21st of July at exactly 2:56 and 15 seconds in the morning. And after taking his first step, we all think he said, that's one step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And that isn't what he said. It's not. That's slightly misquoted. What he actually said was, that's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. So they've just changed a bit of the word. He went on to walk 59 metres away on the east side of the lunar modules. And the region that he walked was about 4 metres deep and 30 metres wide and is known as the East Crater. And that is the greatest distance travelled away from the lunar module. Buzz Aldrin then joined him, and he walked on the surface of the moon as well. Now, I'm going to find you some more stories about walking on the moon, because Neil Armstrong wrote some stories himself about walking on the moon. And I think I'm going to find you those for next week, because that's what you're going to be doing. All about next week is about Neil Armstrong and how he walked on the moon and his life as an astronaut. So I will see you next week. Have a lovely weekend. Goodbye.